Welcome to The Foundry, where leaders are forged daily. Each week we investigate themes of leadership, entrepreneurship, and mindset with some of the greatest minds in real estate. And now, the data scientist of real estate, George Roberts.
Welcome back, entrepreneurs. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing Pablo Gonzalez, host of the Not Your Average Investor show. Pablo Gonzalez is obsessed with human connection, and he's used his expertise to grow nonprofits, to sell over $60 million of construction projects, rescue fledgling startups, set record-breaking quarters for 100 million plus companies, and be named as a top 20 under 40 in his hometown. Most recently, he was featured in Mark Schaefer's book, Belonging to the Brand, and in the new edition of The Ultimate Sales Machine. He is the host of the Not Your Average Investor show, co-founder and co-host of the Category Thinkers Community and Podcast, host of the B2B Community Builders show, and founder of Be the Stage Live, an agency that works with evangelist CEOs to design a category and build a community of super consumers. So with that, I'd like to ask you, or with that, Pablo, I'd like to welcome you to the show.
I am happy to be here, man. That was a long intro there. I'm sorry I put you through all that. Let's how can I make it up for you?
It was a great intro, Pablo. And so
Thank you.
hey, I thought I would just read it because it is good. I want people to get an idea of who you are before we just get into it. And I guess with that, I would start by asking you, what do you tell people when they ask, is how did you build a show that has not only a listenership, viewership, but you've actually got in-person meetups and such. So that's I think a very exciting story.
Yeah, and George, if I may, because I think I missed what you were asking me then. I talked to you about the mechanics of getting people to be friends with each other. The way you get people to show up is to focus on value, right? Like we asked ourselves, very deliberately, not how do we do the rental property investing show. We asked ourselves, what do the people that know us, like what kind of stuff is valuable to them, right? Like if they are looking at growing wealth through rental properties, through turnkey rental property investing, then, they're not just rental property investors. They're people that have looked at the financial system and thought, hey man, all this stuff, like people are not reaching retirement with enough funds. When they're in retirement, they are running out of funds. And the options I'm being given right now, some of them are good, but I feel like there's better stuff out there for me. But I need to know more about these things. I need to see other people that are like me for me to decide if it's for me. And in order to do that, I want to understand alternative asset classes. I want to understand real estate. I want to understand the market, like the economic market, et al. In order to decide if Jacksonville and JWB is right for me, I need to understand why Jacksonville too, right? Like, I mean, so having the mayor of Jacksonville on and stuff like that. And we very deliberately called it the Not Your Average Investor show, right? Like that speaks to people that identify as that, right? Like I like to tell people that if you want to have a community driven podcast, you want to come up with a name that your audience should consider like an aspirational character, like an aspirational kind of like state, and that anybody that you invite on as a guest considers it a compliment when they read the name. And, so it's just thinking about those things, right? Like thinking about like, what is the value that the person, why does this thing need to exist? Well, we were talking about pre-show.
Yeah, exactly. And what a great target to shoot for is to build a true community around the podcast. So I feel like we're trying to do a lot of the same things here at the Foundry. I feel like our audience is made up of investors, people who are seeking something, looking at alternative investments, hoping to find what is the best way to invest today, something that changes over time, which is why I've broadened the show. I love multifamily real estate, still love it. But I'm making a conscious effort now invest some time bringing forward the story of people who are in single family real estate or who are franchising or doing one of many other things, early stage companies or private equity, because it really is quite a journey out there. If you learn about the world of investing, alternative assets, etc., wow, you're never going to be bored.
Yeah, agreed. Right. I wish the first time that I invested with JWB, I invested in one of their private lending programs in like 2014. And after that term came due, after I got my 10% on that private money, I pulled out and I didn't get back in. And I was in Miami thinking, real estate isn't for me because I live in Miami and this is like the $500 craps table at the Bellagio and I need to be at the $10 table. And I kind of like pulled out of real estate altogether, and I wish I hadn't. And if I would have been surrounded by a bunch of people that kind of like I could see why they were doing it and like see them ask the question the way that it affects me or the way that I would phrase it, or they're in a similar position in my life, then I would have really understood why I wanted to stay in that asset class and why maybe, I was in private lending at first, but why maybe going into the long-term buy and hold rental property stuff would have been for me back then. And man, I wish I would have done it in 2014, right? I wish I would have gone all in on Jacksonville real estate at that point. But
yeah, maybe the $500 table wasn't so bad. I mean, when the fish are biting, but so, okay, we spoke a little bit about JWB, and I think it's we probably should have gone into this a little earlier, but tell us exactly, what is JWB doing to support investors? How is this different than you just going out and doing it yourself?
Yeah, man. So you talk about this idea of liking entrepreneurial stories on this show, and as you know, I'm an entrepreneur, right? Like I started my marketing company about like four years ago, just on this like insight of community building for business development. It's working for me. I'm doing well. It took me like 3-4 years to really start making money on it. But one of the biggest influence that has shaped the way that I have maneuvered in the world of business has been being able to ride shotgun as like the speaker box for JWB, right? So the business these guys have built is incredible, right? It's a four-person partnership, and they run that thing like Knights of the Round Table. They've invested heavily in consensus-based decision-making, have very clearly defined roles as like the guy that thinks 10 years out, the financial guy, the inner team guy, and the customer-facing guy, right? And what they've done is incredible. They essentially invented the build to rent asset class for infield lots and have built this company that has completely vertically integrated everything from the acquisition all the way through the asset management, right? So from like acquiring the home, building it, or acquiring the home and renovating it, to leasing it and property management. They manage over like 5,500 properties now, to maintaining it and having this like construction services department that is to creating a data flywheel around all of that decision making of what it takes to keep a single family working class home as a performing asset, to portfolio management, right? I have like a one call a month with a bubbly late 20s, early 30s person that's telling me where all my money's going and how it's doing. And like, it's like the first time I ever felt rich, right? Like having that conversation. And they've even taken it a step further now that they're 17 years in. They had this vision of how a thriving urban core is going to help everything. And they've actually invested they own 20 city blocks of downtown Jacksonville, and they're actively placemaking in order to drive up median incomes in order to affect the 5,500 properties that they manage for investors around the urban core. So that's the business model. It's essentially take owning a rental property and make it as passive as humanly possible, right, while controlling not just the deal, but as much of the situation around the entire performance of the asset for the life of it.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that there are many different types of investors here. Some people may be more focused on running their own business, or they may be an executive at a corporation. And passive investing, certainly something we talk a lot about. Most of our people are in multifamily passive investing, but that's what I like about this, is that I think there's got to be somebody out there in the audience today that says that that's just the perfect thing. That's exactly what I want. Now, what I like about Jacksonville, now I invest in Florida too. I've got property in Central Florida.
Okay.
But what I like is that I think to be good at something, you got to stay in your lane and you got to focus if you're going to be successful. So tell us, what precisely is it about Jacksonville that excites you, and why is that the focus of the company?
First of all, as a company that's focused on, as a podcast that's focused on entrepreneurship, 100% agree with you. I'm a huge Jim Collins fan, right? Like this idea of the hedgehog that you build that is extraordinary at this one thing as a clarity for business success and for success in general, very, very much believe in it. Now, what's happening in Jacksonville specifically, and by the way, JWB's done that, right? Like I think there's other turnkey companies that try to go wide and try to offer, you know, as much control as they can in a variety of markets. JWB's made a strategic decision to be an inch wide and a mile deep in only Jacksonville. And that's why they've had to, you know, continue to evolve and vertically integrate to the level that they have. But what's happening uniquely right now right now in Jacksonville is this idea that, you know, Jacksonville over the last 10 years has been one of the fastest growing cities in the US, right? Like that's known to real estate investors. What is less known to real estate investors is that this has all really happened with a largely dormant urban core, right? There's this urban core that's got like 3 waters and it's beautifully picturesque and has this old historic stock of buildings that are kind of run down and semi-abandoned. And it's been sitting at this, about 3,000 residents for like the duration of Jacksonville, right? Because there's this old guard that kind of controlled that area that didn't really want to progress and build a city. And what's happened is through dilution with immigration and through aging up and people like the founders of JWB, who are all like late 30s, early 40s guys, that old guard has been removed. And now folks like JWB have come in and invested in 20 city blocks, partnered with DLP Capital to raise this this project that's going to be like a $2 billion fund that creates this entire district of placemaking around the urban core. And as all this is happening, the urban core, since I've been here, had gone from 3,000 to like about 5,000. And in the last 5 years that I've lived here, it's jumped up to like almost 9,000 by now, right? I think it's somewhere in the mid 8,000s. And what happens in an urban core when it hits 10,000 residents is that it tips. And now developers don't need incentives to come and develop in the urban core. Whole Foods all of a sudden wants to be a corner tenant, right? Like in mixed use development and these kinds of things. And what you have seen statistically happen in cities like Nashville and Charlotte and Denver and all these other places that we all wish we invested 10 years ago, 20 years ago, is that when an urban core tips and comes online and becomes a 24/7 place to live and thrive, it attracts greater talent, it attracts better companies, and it brings up the median income level of the city, which makes property values, I call it bends the curve on the historical appreciation rate, right? Like it starts to go. We saw these in all these cities that I mentioned. And this idea of this happening right now in this moment that happens to be buoyed by all the COVID trends of people moving south and like, you know, the Zoom towns and doing all this kind of stuff, and the balance of the local Jacksonville economy this is what really excites me about what's happening in Jacksonville. Like, I think this is like Steve Jobs just announced the iPod and the iPhone and the iPad and, you know,
I love that energy.
All the rest of the stuff is coming, man. So
Jacksonville, a lot of great things about it. But before I get to that, and add in on that, I like what you're talking about, hitting the certain core of 10,000, right? You get that critical mass, live, work, and play. This is like Jane Jacobs stuff, Life and Death of American Cities. It's huge because when you have like a suburbs, you know, some people call like bedroom communities, right? People just go there to sleep. They work somewhere else. Some places, some cities are not really fit for sleeping in the evenings, and people kind of leave in the evenings. But when you can really have that place that, you know, it's safe enough to live, you've got the jobs, and then it's exciting in the evenings, that's huge.
100%. And the reason it's huge is because it attracts company headquarters. It attracts young talent, right? So like this is all a median income play here. And what we're seeing happen Yeah, it's a synergy, right? So like FIS, a fintech Fortune 500 company, just built a like close to $1 billion headquarters in downtown. They're putting the final touches on that stuff. The University of Florida just announced that they're putting a University of Florida, that by the way got rated as the #1 public higher education institution by the Wall Street Journal. Go Gators! I went there. Is starting a graduate program in downtown Jacksonville that's going to specialize in fintech and healthcare tech, because finance and healthcare are big here, and powered by the world's biggest AI supercomputer that is owned by the University of Florida, right? Like the economic flywheel of economic development and prosperity is going real hard, and it's happening because this place is hitting that tipping point, and because it's right before it, it's still economically viable to get in, right? So yeah, man, I see this. I worked in economic development in Miami when I was doing all the nonprofit stuff from 2009 to 2017. So for me, it's real pattern recognition of like a real opportunity that I lived before in a place where I happen to be, and I have the skill set of a networker. So I'm getting in.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, get it on the ground floor. Those are the investments you got to look for. So yeah, just add one more. I know that you just expanded your Deepwater port. I think that was just maybe 2 or 3 years ago.
Yep.
That's huge because that helps manufacturing. You mentioned computing and all the other things. So yeah, Jacksonville, great place. Again, love Florida, but I think what's most important is that you know who you are. I like people who know who they are, and that's huge. And you've chosen Jacksonville, and for some great reasons. Well, how about this? Let me give you one last opportunity to talk about real estate.
Cool.
You mentioned build to rent, but I don't think you really expounded on why that's important, why that's valuable to our society. And again, you want to make money, you've got to provide for people's needs. And I think it really is meeting people's needs right now. What would you like to add?
Yeah. Like we just said, this workforce housing supply thing is a real problem in cities in America.
Yes.
And not a lot of cities you can go out and do a planned community that's built to rent somewhere in the outskirts if you have a ton of land, or if you have it somewhere close to the inner city. It's probably not a very thriving city. Or you can figure out how to find these infield lots, these dilapidated homes, these areas that haven't been built in yet, and just get really, really good at putting a house inside one lot and doing it at an affordable level that creates a property that is easy to maintain, that is easy to, how do you say it, like upgrade, right? So it's like if you build these homes with materials that are durable so they can take a beating, because let's just face it, somebody lives in a home that you own and they don't own it, they're going to beat it up, right? It's a family. Easy to maintain so that they can keep it clean and it doesn't have a thing, and doesn't have a high cost of replacement, right? Like making sure that the things the material that you have in there, carpet might be cheaper on the front end, but one thing happens in that carpet, you got to rip out the whole carpet. Whereas like laminated flooring, you can replace a section of a room if need be, right? So thinking through those things to reduce ongoing maintenance and increase the lifetime of your resident there, right? Like really understanding that what makes a difference is staying, keeping the property rented. So aligning incentives in a way that you're maximizing for tenants stay, as opposed to like short-term rent price. Those things make a big difference, right? Like having an average resident stay of over 4.5 years because you only sign 2 and 3 year leases, and you have a 76% renewal rate in a department that focuses on that thing like a sales opportunity to renew residents. That is the piece that you got to solve for in order to have the luxury to really solve this problem for people.
Great. And I love to call it out because I think that real estate is a very broad field, and the way you're talking about build to rent is very different than how most people approach it. They're buying things on the outskirts of cities where it's not too expensive yet, but where it's clear that you need to build a little density, building really close together. They try to build in some amenities into a community. You're doing infills, and just want to really call that out. So people who are out here looking for, what sort of real estate do I want to invest in? What are the different ways to do it? There are many.
Yeah, there are, man.
Good stuff. Okay, well, with that, I'm afraid that if we don't do this, we're not going to get to it. But I always like to ask everybody the same 7 questions as our challenging rapid fire round. Pablo, are you up to the
Oh,
challenge?
oh yeah. Oh yeah. I love a rapid
Oh,
fire.
he woke up ready. All right. Okay, if you could be known for only one thing, what would it be?
I'll be known for the person that taught the world that community creation is the best way to build a business.
What's the greatest lesson you've learned what's the greatest leadership lesson you've learned as an entrepreneur?
Man, what I've learned is that if you can build a clientele that are super fans of you, you're unstoppable. And the only way you do that is by solving a real problem, right? Like solving a Monday morning problem for people and focusing on the problem that you solve, not how great you are, not, your brand or whatever. Focus on the problem and let that be the guide, and investing heavily in culture, in building a great team that is happy to be there. Because if you do those two things, you create super fans of your company, no matter what kind of company you are. You don't have to be Tesla, right? Like I've seen it from JWB to an HVAC manufacturer that I was just doing a project with last week. It is possible, and I believe it is the most compelling way to build a company and the most sustainable way to build a company.
What personal characteristic has been most pivotal to your success?
I honestly think it's my ability to see the world through the other person's eyes instead of my own, right? Like that idea that I walked into a room looking for belonging, right? Like I think my superpower is that I'm really able to fall in love with everybody that I meet because I see something great in them, and it's easy for me to find that, and that I can then communicate really well. So it makes me a great hype man.
I love it. That's so deep. And I almost feel bad now because we're going to mix it up here. And just tell me
Feel
when
free,
to
man.
stop cutting the deck. We're going to ask
All
something
right, let's go.
totally random.
Yeah.
All right. I feel like I've asked this one already.
Okay.
If you didn't have to worry about money, what would you do with your life?
I was just having a conversation with my wife about this. I would, from the activity level, I would maximize my days of surfing, which is one of the big reasons I live in Jacksonville already. What I would be doing with my life would be focusing on maximum impact. Like it would really, it sucks to say it this way, but I really would like to have enough clout, whether it's money or influence or whatever, to have my thumb on the scales of how this political system operates, what we prioritize, how we solve problems, things of that sort. I think you have to, at some point, if you want to make an impact, you got to reach those levels, and truly change the system in a way that is aligned in incentives with the end user, which is the American population and the world.
Big picture stuff.
Yeah.
So then, can you name a book that's helped to forge you as a leader and as an entrepreneur, and why?
Oh yeah. The book that I have directly above my left ear right here, Play Bigger. That is the book that established discipline of category design, which is essentially how you become a category king is by evangelizing a problem that is completely different than the rest of the market, and wrapping yourself around that problem to create your own category instead of compete in someone else's category. And what it's shown is that if you do that correctly, the category king captures 76% of the market cap. So, and then the rest of the category is fighting for the rest of 24%. It's why companies like Tesla are worth more than the entire auto, like the auto industry, because they're category kings and they designed the category around electric mobility. So Play Bigger. That's category design. Get on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody notices the second biggest pumpkin. Maybe I'm just thinking about
It's true.
fall things here today, but tell us what's the biggest hurdle you've overcome in your business in the last year, and how did that help you grow?
Yeah. The biggest hurdle that I have overcome in the last year has been really coming to terms with my self-worth. And the way that that manifests, the way that that affects me in having overcome that hurdle is that I am much quicker to have the uncomfortable conversation now that's going to cause issues later. It has allowed me to show up in a way where I understand the value that I'm bringing to it, and it makes the person across the table from me way more comfortable in understanding what they're either investing in or what's in it for them. And that's really been the big lesson. It has 4 years into it, this like self-worth thing really came to a head for me, and going through it has profoundly changed my life.
It's very profound. And if you could just send us out with a quote to help forge our listeners as leaders and entrepreneurs.
Yeah. Listen, if you want to really do something big, you need to focus on being a kingmaker, not being a king. People focusing on being king will always compete with everyone else being a king. If you focus on being a kingmaker, everybody that wants to be king will want to be your friend and will know that, they're better off by having you in their life. And that is how you'll get to the thing that you want to create.
All right, outstanding. Now, Pablo, I just want to make sure that our audience has an opportunity to reach out to you. So, smoke signals, carrier pigeon, internet. What's the best way to reach out to Pablo Gonzalez?
Yeah, best way to reach me is by getting into that Not Your Average Investor Show ecosystem, right? If you go to nyais.com and you can show up for one of the live shows, you can listen to it on the podcast, you can watch it on YouTube, whatever it takes. I assume that maybe you want to reach out to me, maybe you're just interested in what JWB is doing, but that's both. Go to nyais.com. And if you're specifically looking to invest in single family workforce housing in Jacksonville, there's a specific place that you should go to not waste time becoming buddies with everybody and all that stuff. But you go to jwbmakeseateasy.com. If that's what interested you. If I'm what interested you, then Not Your Average Investor Show.
Well, I want to thank you warmly for taking your time to share your knowledge and experience with our audience. Thank you, Pablo.
Thanks, man. This was awesome. The one thing that I would like to ask the audience is, George puts a lot of work into this thing, and it's clearly something he passionately cares about. And there's a very, very easy way to just like add value and say thank you, which is hit 5-star review on whatever app you're watching, and or like send this podcast to a friend. It is really a very small thing that you can do that will really, really go a long way, because that's what podcasters are in it for. And George clearly cares about this stuff. So help him out.
Thank you so much. And clearly a 5-star guest, Pablo. Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a great day.
Appreciate you.